Hello silly geese, it is I, Lily, and today I have a Path of Exile build for you. Something I have been playing, something I have been having a lot of fun with, something I have seen a few others play, but not a lot. In fact, using a mandatory unique to filter on Path of Exile Ninja, there are only 50 characters there. So this is, I would say, somewhat niche, but in my opinion, very fun. And the build we are talking about today is Crit Thorns Titan. Yes, you heard that right. I get hit, but no, actually, the enemies get hit. That is the gist of the build. Now, if you have not played an ARPG or other similar game with thorns in it before, the basic concept is enemies hit me, enemies take damage, I also take damage, but more importantly, enemies take damage. Now, in many games, the way that works is that enemies take a percentage of the damage they dealt to me. But in Path of Exile 2, no. That is not how it works. In Path of Exile 2, the enemies take the Thorns damage that my character sheet says they take, no matter how much damage they do to me. So if they do 1 damage to me, they take somewhere between 2,713 and 4,112 damage. If they do 10,000 damage to me, ouch, they take somewhere between 2,713 and 4,112 damage. That is at least at the base level. There are many ways to improve this damage, but that is the gist of how Thorns work. Now, how did they scale? Mostly physical damage, not hits from you, because you don't hit with them. Except when you do. There are some things that make that happen, which I will get into later, but for now, you understand the gist of Thorns. Take damage, do damage. Take damage, do damage. Take no damage, do no damage. Yes. That is where we lead into the next portion of this video, which is the pros and cons of Thorns. Now, I'm going to start with the pros, even though you have already heard one con, and the first pro is easy 2-button gameplay. I know you look at my bar here, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things are bound plus movement. Yes, I'm a click mover. Deal with it. I've tried WASD movement. It just does not click, haha, with my brain. I have these bound mostly for I like them. I don't even have to have them in my gem menu, which even has an empty slot as it is. This one's a movement ability, so it doesn't count. This one's a movement ability, so it also does not count. This one is here because I used it when I was leveling. I have not used it in a very long time. This one is here just because I did Trials of the Sekima earlier, and blocking is important. And this one is here because some other people were using it, and I didn't fuck with it. I'm instead, for the same purpose, using this. And then I'm using this as my basic attack. Those are the 2 buttons I need. The shout and the stab. Nothing else really matters. At all, really. Secondly, good clear speed for a strength build. Now, we all know strength builds have terrible movement because they tend to be relying on armor. Something that is nice is you kill enemies very fucking fast. So, low movement speed doesn't matter as much when you don't really have to stop. Also, something that is quite nice is a pair of boots that I would say is more or less mandatory to this build, has 20% increased move speed on them. I know with the rare boots you can get up to 35, but 20 is certainly better than nothing. And the third pro, I would say this has quite high damage for the budget. Budget, very low. Damage, very high. I'm currently clearing tier 12 maps on my level 75 character, and damage incoming hurts, but enemies die pretty much instantly. Con number 1. To be perfectly honest, I haven't been playing this build for very long. It is the most hours I have in one build in Path of Exile 2, but I am a Path of Exile 1 player. I have played Thorns in Diablo 4, but this is Path of Exile 2. Thorns work very differently. I will say, Thorns have clicked with me more or less immediately. I understand them, I think, extremely well, but this game is still in early access, no one's had a lot of time with it. There are definitely improvements that can be made that I have not made. I have seen other people's builds, I believe that I have made improvements over their builds, but there is definitely still a lot of room for improvement. Con number 1 on my list, I know I just mentioned a con, but con number 1 on the list that I scripted before I recorded this video, no hit, no damage. Yes, if I do not get hit, I do absolutely no damage. Editing Lily, please insert a clip here to show the amount of damage that I do when I do not get hit. That's going to be difficult to record because most things hit. However, there are enemies that do damage to you, a lot of damage, that doesn't count as hits. Those little fucking bird guys that spit chaos clouds at you, not a hit. Those little guys who put little red balls of blood out, they spawn on the self-events map, I believe, they do not count as a hit. Those enemies are a massive pain in the ass and will be responsible for 99.9% of your deaths. I can vouch, I have 109 deaths on this character. Few of them to AFK, a few of them to being stupid, most of them to fuckers who do not hit. Second downside, this build is a melee build. It is a very melee build. It has more or less the minimum amount of range you can possibly have with a spear. And that, as many of you will know, is not a lot of range. Your attack speed is very high, your move speed is reasonable, this makes up for it, but if there is a thing that you would ideally not stand in, but the enemy refuses to move away from it, you will stand in it. And yes, this includes the stupid fucking little chaos plants that spawn on rares and in rituals that are deleting basically every melee build in the game at the moment. I hate them, everyone hates them, they suck, GGG, please fix that bullshit. I know my chaos res sucks, but I have seen people with 75 chaos res get absolutely deleted by those cunts. The chaos plants were in fact my third listed con. Every melee build sucks with them. They suck. They're awful. Fourth con, armor. Move speed sucks. Also, armor is just kind of a shit defensive layer. I have hopes that GGG will fix that soon, but compared to other methods of defenses, armor only prevents physical damage. Why that is a basic defense, I do not understand. In Path of Exile 1, there are many ways to make your armor apply to other damage sources. There are also a lot of ways to reduce global damage as long as you are melee. I hope that at some point that gets introduced to Path of Exile 2, but we do not live at some point. We live at right now, and armor sucks. That is it for the pros and cons. Now, enjoy this galore of gameplay with whatever royalty-free music I could find to throw with it, and I'll be back with you soon to talk about Ascendancies. By the way, you can click on the timestamps if you want to skip the gameplay. I tend to do that in most build guides that I watch. I know some people like it, that's why it's here. It's also proof that the build does work. But yeah, timestamps if you want to skip it. Now, courtesy of this wonderful thing called Path of Building, we will discuss Ascendancy. Now, you maybe have assumed off of the things I've said before, such as you must get hit and you use armor, that we are in fact playing a warrior. I'm sure you could make this work on other classes, but I have chosen warrior, and pretty much everyone else I have seen playing this build has chosen warrior. Now this is the point where I shout out other creators. I have seen that Mathil has played a Smith of Katava, but even he has admitted that it's a little janky. That said, he is definitely more knowledgeable at the game than me, so feel free to check him out. I did use some of his decisions as inspiration for this build. I also originally heard that Thorns was viable from watching a video by Carl Torak, who is playing a Thorns Warbringer. Now I will say his Warbringer build does look somewhat easier to play than my Titan build, but it also looks not as endgame viable. Much easier to level, much easier to start your mapping with, but the chunk falls off a little bit with his build. But check it out, check out Mathil's build, get some ideas for what you want to do with your Thorns build. Now we, on the other hand, will be playing the Titan. Now, the main reason that I chose this class is this node right here, Hulking Form, 50% increased effect of small passive skills. Now this basically means that you get a lot of extra nodes on your passive tree. You don't actually, but 2 nodes now count as 3 as long as you want 3 nodes doing the same thing, and there are a lot of instances that you do. Now of course leading up to it, you do only have colossal capacity. I like my extra inventory slots. If you do not, shame, there is no space for you in my backpack anyway. It is currently full of tablets. Otherwise, for ascending, most of the stuff on Titan does not make any sense, but who doesn't love 50% more armor from equipped body armor, especially when that is not a unique, so you can get pretty much as much armor as you want, and that is your main source of armor and defense. And then finally, I have not ascended here yet, but I plan to get 15% more life. Yes, 15% more life. That is a lot of life. That is a lot of chunk. On the current state of my level 75 very scuffed character, that would give me a total of 238 total life, or as Path of Building simulates it, 828 effective hit pool. That is not bad. That is a 7.5% increase. Thank you very much. That is tasty, and I will take it. That said, if you do not like Titan, you can still look at this build guide, but there are better guides by Carl Torak and Mathil for Smith of Katava and Warbringer in the inverted orders because I am bad at reading. Links to their guides will be in the description, so click there if you want to see what they are doing. Just because I choose Titan does not mean you have to. Now, if you have stayed with me and you will be playing Titan, or you will be playing Thorns and you've stayed with me anyway, even though you're not going to play Titan, here's a little bit of information that is relevant to everyone. Things that you cannot say no to on your gear. Now the first non-negotiable piece of gear in this build will be the Crown of the Pale King. This makes it so that Thorns can retaliate against all hits. By default in Path of Exile 2, Thorns only retaliates against melee attacks. That is some things that enemies do to you. It is by far not all or even most of them. However, Thorns can retaliate against all hits, covers everything except some of the stupidest mechanics in the game. Hi Chaos Clouds, I hate you. It does also provide 10% increased rarity of items, which as we all know is an important stat in this game. The second thing that I would argue is a gear non-negotiable is Briar Patch. Now, if you want Resolute Technique or don't want crits for some other reason, these aren't necessary. However, I think you will lose a fuck ton of damage if you pick to not go with crits. Now, these provide you a 25% Thorns basic critical hit chance. This can be scaled up quite significantly. Right now, I do not have much going for my crit chance. There are ways I can scale my crit chance much better. I have put very little effort into it, and I have a 60.14% crit chance. That means that in 3 in 5 attacks, I will critical strike. That is quite nice. It is a lot more damage. It is 324% more damage as we stand right now. That can quite easily go all the way up to 400%. 4 times the damage on 60% of attacks on approximately 3,000 to 4,000 damage. And again, that 3,000 to 4,000 damage can scale much fucking higher. And I forgot to mention this earlier, it doesn't give a shit about armor, because it's something we do in the passive tree. Now the third non-negotiable piece of gear, or should I say 3 pieces of gear, for your build are going to be your Thorns pieces. Thorns obviously a very important stat, and you can get a very substantial amount of it on 3 pieces of armor. Now, all of these pieces that can get a decent amount of inherent thorns can get up to 151 to 220 physical thorns damage. This is quite a bit. You saw how much damage I am doing. I only have 65 to 140 on my belt, which is the first slot, 109 to 164 on my chest, which is the second slot, and 139 to 155 on my shield, which is the third slot that can get a decent chunk of thorns. That is not a lot that I have, and I am still doing extremely substantial damage. This can be scaled much higher, and remember, these numbers are before any percentage-based increases from other sources. That is a lot of potential thorns. I am nowhere near the tip of that, and I am one-shotting map bosses at tier 12. I do believe that I can very easily one-shot tier 16 map bosses, and I can't wait to find out how much damage I do to pinnacle bosses. I would like to live in a dream world where I one-shot them too. I don't know if that is real though. It is worth noting at this point as well that you can get greater runes of tithing that give 1 to 2 lightning thorns damage to every piece of armor that you socket them into. I have them on all of my gear at the moment. I am contemplating switching them out for more defensive runes, because right now I'm taking a lot of damage, and 1 to 10 per piece of armor is not a whole lot. Hi there, future Lily here to say that they literally just buffed these runes by what maths out to a 500% buff. They now do 1 to 100 lightning thorns damage. Our build is still a physical thorns build because we have physical damage increases, not lightning damage increases, but I'm kind of interested to see where this can go. I probably won't be putting these runes back into my existing character simply because we do enough damage, but I'd like to explore sides of the tree that have increases to lightning damage to see what I could do with a purely lightning thorns based build. There's a few support gems that could lead into that. No gear other than obviously the crown of the Pale King that does much for that I know of, but of course there are already a lot of ways to scale lightning damage, so I'm gonna look into that and just see what we can do, because that sounds fun. Anyway, I'll stop interrupting you, enjoy your video. And then the final gear non-negotiable, this should go without saying, because most builds in this game require this. Any builds that don't are very fucking weird, and please let me know about them, I love stupid shit like that. 75% res to everything. More if you can slot it in, if you can get it on jewels, if you can get it from corruptions. Increased max res is always nice. Now we get to the juiciest and tastiest portion of this video. Hello to everyone who just skipped to the timestamp for this, because you know that this is the most viewed part of the video for a good reason. We will be talking about how the build actually functions, not just how thorns work in general like I covered earlier, not just the uniques that make the build work. Why do things make the build work? Now, the first thing that is obviously important, this is a Thorns build, we want our Thorns damage. Thorns damage is how we scale, not weapon damage. If you look at my spear, you will see that the damage is absolutely terrible. This is because we do not even 1% scale off of the damage on our weapon. Now, in a mirror tier universe, of course, it would be nice to have some damage on our spear, but it is far, far more important at this point to have attack speed, accuracy rating, and a low attribute requirement. This is why I'm using a low eye level base and only requiring 72 dexterity. Now 72 dexterity is a very specific requirement. I specifically traded for spears that did not require more than 72 dexterity. I will put a trade link into the description of this video for how to buy your spear, but you do not want to go above 72 dexterity required. This is because you do not want to have more than 72 dexterity on your character. Every point of dexterity that you have is 1 point of strength that you do not have. Now, the reason we are going for 72 as our dexterity requirement is for Thunderous Leap and Tame Beast. These gems are both tier 9 gems, meaning they can be at minimum level 9, which requires 72 dexterity. This does also mean that we are capping our Rapid Assault at level 9. This is for much the same reason as many of our other decisions, and that is to keep our dexterity requirement low so that we can have as much strength as possible, and also because we don't actually care about the actual damage of this ability. No, The damage that we care about is our Thorns damage. Now you may be wondering, if your only source of damage is your Thorns damage, why do you even have an attack at all? And that is a wonderful question with a wonderful answer. And that wonderful answer is the support gem Barbs and the support gem Quillburst. Now I do not remember which is which off of the top of my head right now, but one of those abilities makes it so that when you get hit, your next 4 hits deal your Thorns damage to the enemy. And the other one makes it so that when you get hit, your next 4 hits deal Thorns damage to your enemy and everyone around them. The radius is small, it's big enough to kill clumps. These do not scale off of your gem level or weapon damage at all. They only scale off of your total Thorns damage in the Thorns section of your character sheet. That is all they care about. So that is the number you want high. That is the absolute core of the damage of this build. However, that is not enough to achieve our glorious one-shot monster pops. No, there is something that takes our damage to an absolutely insane another level. You may have heard creators talk about how trash this ability is for other builds, but for Thorns, it is the best thing since sliced bread. Nay, 'tis greater than sliced bread. And that is Scavenged Plating. Now my Scavenged Plating is currently only at level 18. At some point I would like to have this up to level 24 or 25. However, at level 18, this provides me 51 to 77 Thorns per Scavenged Plating, with a maximum of 10 stacks. Those 10 stacks are not too difficult to get with other decisions we have made. At those 10 stacks, this instead is 510 to 770 Thorns per Scavenged Plating. That is more damage than all of my gear combined. This more than doubles my damage. I will insert a clip of my damage jumping up when Scavenged Plating activates right here. Editingly, please do that, it is important. Something else that scales our Scavenged Plating damage even higher is that when we have even just 1 stack of Scavenged Plating, we gain a 40% increase to our Thorns damage. So again, Scavenged Plating triggers, we get a fuck ton of damage. Thorn Skin is a very, very nice support gem for only 20 spirit. It is essential. We also on our Scavenged Plating do have persistence to make it last longer, as well as physical mastery to bring the level up. That is probably all the support gems I'll ever put on it. Maybe at some point I'll put Vitality, however I can totally put Vitality in this empty slot I have here, right by my River Drake once I have enough quality on this gem to keep the spirit cost down enough. Vitality isn't really super important to the build, regen is just nice to have. I currently have instant leech that heals me to full immediately, so I'm not too perturbed. You can also see here that I did at one point have Time of Need. You can use this if you want to, if you are really struggling with ailments. It is nice to have. It is only still slotted here because I'm lazy and I don't need to take it out. You may also want to know why I have a River Drake and what he is doing. Well, you can see over his head over here that he is giving me Invulnerability Aura. This is because while invulnerable, you still deal your Thorns damage. So this is just take less damage for absolute free. Well, 35% of my spirit, but we have actually got no other use for our spirit. If you find another use for spirit, please let me know, because this really isn't doing that much to me, but there is nothing better that I can find. Now, something that you may know about Scavenged Plating is that it requires you to fully break an enemy's armor. There are not a lot of ways to do that in this game, and you might be looking at my spear and being like, most of the ways to Scavenged Plating need a mace. Well, we actually have 2 very convenient solutions for getting fully broken armor. The first, and the one that I used for most of my gameplay, was Resonating Shield. This currently, as it is right now, breaks 871 armor per little bang 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 that it does every 0.8 seconds, and that breaks a lot of enemies' armor very quickly. However, while using Resonating Shield, despite the fact that you take less damage, you unfortunately don't really do any. And I didn't like that, so I decided to find a new plan to break armor, and that is where I realized that Rapid Assault can have more than just 2 linked support gems. Right now, I have 3 support gems linked. Ideally, I would like to have the full 5, But my extra one here is Splinter. This supports skills that hits enemies, causing these hits to break armor, yay, equal to 15% of physical damage dealt by the supported skill. This can be very hastily scaled up by Demolisher, and then we can also get an endurance charge when we break enemies' armor, which is just a nice thing to have. This means that the more we attack, the more we break armor, the more we get scavenged plating. That's very nice, but it does present one problem on enemies that survive longer than the duration of scavenged plating. What about when their armor is still broken and you need to break it again? Well, that is why we have Infernal Cry. Infernal Cry mixed with Batter Shout makes it so that whenever you shout at enemies, they don't have broken armor anymore. Now you might think this reduces your damage then. Remember, we have ways to ignore enemy armor. All that we care about is that this resets the enemy's armor break so that we can break it again and get another stack of scavenged plating. I personally have chosen to use this as my way to consume armor purely because I think it is fun and cool. But I do feel obligated to tell you that there is a much cheaper and easier way to do this, and that is your basic attack. Spear Stab uses absolutely no mana, and you can put Exploit Weakness into it. You will only need Exploit Weakness into this, and that makes it so that it consumes enemies' fully broken armor to deal 40% more damage. Again, 40% more than 0 is still 0, but the important part is that the enemies don't have armor anymore. I found that this sometimes didn't work. I don't know if it was an accuracy issue or what. Infernal Cry always worked for me 100% of the time, every time. Exploit Weakness and Spear is how some other people are doing this. It is definitely a very competent way to do it. It is probably the best way to do it when you have a 100% hit chance and therefore can't miss, but I just think shouting at enemies is fun and cool. And now that is pretty much all of the choices that I have made with my gear and my gems to keep things scaled. So this is the part where I'm going to tell you about what I did with my passive tree. Now, the first thing that I did while leveling, which felt very important, was to get 10% of Thorns damage leached as life from Vengeance. This gave me the ability to not die. This actually, while you are doing a lot of damage, turns out to be a lot of leech, which means that with Vaal Pact, if I hit an enemy once with Barbs or Quillburst triggered, I get to full health. Now, of course, to be on the safer side against enemies that deal more damage or enemies that take less damage or whatever, I do have Bloodthirsty providing me increased amount of life leached, and I also speed ran my tree straight to Goring, again to increase the amount of life leached. It also gives me increased physical damage, which is nice, that's what our Thorns do. However, it does reduce our maximum life. We would probably gain a little bit of max hit if we lost this, but I personally just think that the leech is very worth it, especially because at some point we would like to not have Vaal Pact, because later down the line I will probably go for 20% of leeches instant, but where I am right now, this works fine. I don't feel like I have any defensive issues. Sometimes I get one shot, so do we all. Slower leech is not going to save me from that, and nor is a life flask. The next place to go for was Lay Siege, because this just increases my damage per block chance, and we are running a shield, so why the fuck not? Also, leading up to it, I get increased block chance. Who doesn't like that? From there, I went to Cruel Methods for breaking more armor. Again, our scavenged plating does not trigger if we do not break armor, and the faster you break armor, the more scavenged plating you get, so this was actually quite important. I may at some point even take these small armor break nodes. I have seen that a lot of people have taken the increased physical damage nodes instead. That also does make us break more armor because our armor breaking scales with our damage. The next place I went to that I weirdly noticed not a lot of people playing this build have gone to is Polymath. 7% increased attributes allows us to get to 72 dexterity very easily. It also increases our strength quite substantially, which is more life, which is more nice. More life, more nice. Easy. Also, we will be scaling our damage off of our strength later. From there, I started pathing towards the leftmost portion of the tree. Something that I thought was very nice is this unbending for increased maximum life and increased stun threshold. No one likes getting stunned, despite the fact that we do not have to attack to do damage. Getting stunned is still very annoying. And more life, more nice. I then went for spiked armor. The much more important part of this is actually just the increased Thorns damage leading up to it, but the 50% chance to ignore enemy armor is very nice. This does apply to your quills and barbs, so it is a very significant increase to damage, especially against armored enemies. yes, we break armor, but we try to consume that as fast as possible. At some point, I will likely take this Thorns Ignore Armor node to bring that up to, I believe after my Ascendancy gains, a total of 84% chance to ignore enemy armor. If I took this node, it would reach 100%, but that's really not necessary. 84% is very, very high. I then moved up the tree towards Battle Fever for more increased physical damage. Something worth noting, there are a lot of nodes on the tree that provide increased physical damage to hits, or increased physical damage to attacks. These do not scale us at all. We can only take increased physical damage nodes, because those scale our Thorns damage, which is all we care about. There are a lot of increased physical damage to hits nodes. There are very few increased physical damage nodes. We have taken pretty much all of them. I then work my way up here towards Retaliation, which is 75% increased Thorn damage if you have blocked recently. My block chance is currently sitting at 63%. This means that if I am getting attacked basically twice in 4 seconds, which is definitely happening most of the time, I'm getting 75% increased damage, which is just nice. There is no reason to not take this. And then finally, Revenge. This only became important once I had a decent piece of armor with a decent amount of armor, but physical thorns equal to 3% of armor on equipped body armor is actually quite a lot of thorns once you get decent body armor. And again, this scales from all of our other increases to thorns, including scavenged plating. From there, my next priority was remembering what boots I have and getting more crit chance. This 6% of Thorns critical hit chance is a more, not an increase, so that takes our 25% base up to a 31% base, which then is scaled by all of our increases. So to take advantage of that, I went for Vulgar Methods to get another 35% increased critical hit chance, and then to Barbaric Strength for a 45% increased critical damage bonus. This is all just in the interest of keeping our one-shots very one-shotty. Now that is where I am right now on the tree. Things that I do plan on doing later is first off getting this Brute Strength node for 1% increased damage per 15 strength. We currently have 400. By the time we get there, we will have a lot more strength, so this is a significant damage increase. And then also heading towards Jack of all trades for 2% increased damage per 5 of our lowest attribute. That's currently intelligence at 45. That's not a significant increase right now. It works out to about a 18% increase. Once we get, however, we will have more intelligence from these all attribute nodes that lead up to it. But also, by the time I'm there, I hope to have an Astra Mentis, which will give me a massive amount of intelligence, which means that this will actually, at the point where I have an Astra Mentis, give me more damage than Brute Strength does. However, Astra Mentis is expensive, and I'd like to give myself more time to get that. The final place I will be pathing to is Parrying Notion. I currently have it instilled, however, I would like to path to it so that I can get the increased block chance that leads up to it, and then so that I can, at that point, instill an Offensive Stance, which gives us 75% increased damage, because at that point we will have 75% block chance. The reason I have not instilled this yet, those delirium thingamabobs, whatever they're called, are very expensive and are just not a priority to me at level 75. Now, I have noticed that a lot of other people playing this build have just pathed straight to Offensive Stance, moving past things like Shield Block, but I really didn't like the idea of 25% reduced global defenses. When our armor is already quite low, I want to get that up, not down, so I thought I will rather spend the currency to anoint that. And I really don't think that 75% increased damage is worth the 10 points it takes to get you. However, I do think it is worth a couple divines. Now at this point, I'm pretty sure that I have explained to you everything important about how this build works. If you think I have missed anything, please let me know in the comments, but also, if you are interested in copy-pasting from me, don't worry, you don't have to rewatch this portion of the video 100 times to find the spot that you wanted to find to copy my build. I will put this Path of Building link into the description below the video. If you do not understand how Path of Building works, Zizaran has a wonderful video on it. Maybe I will also make my own video on it at some point. If you have any questions, ask them in YouTube comments. I will reply to them and also include answers to them here, so that any future people who download the build will not feel the need to answer the same questions. The most important thing that I do believe will be a frequently asked question is, what do I do with Trial of Sekhmet when the goal is to get hit? The solution: 75% honor and hold up your shield. Yes, you don't do as much damage when you're not attacking, but you do still do damage. You can still absolutely melt through the Sekhmet bosses. I did my Sekhmet this morning. I was like, this is going to be scary. This is going to be difficult. This is going to be a nightmare. I one-shot the floor 3 boss. Genuine, real one-shot. I thought he would have at least one of those big scorpion diving into the sand phases. No. he got deleted, and I wish I had a clip of that, but I am not redoing the Trials of the Sekima to get that clip. As much as I say that it is doable, it is even easy, it is still painful, you are still melee, you still have to just stand there holding up your shield. It is not exactly fun and interactive gameplay. Anyway, that is pretty much it for this Thorns build guide. This is an endgame build guide. I'm sure from what I have said, you can piece together the idea of leveling. I do believe that it is actually very easy to level with Thorns once you get a Crown of the Pale King. Up until that point, I honestly wouldn't even try it. But yes, I believe it is viable to level as Thorns. I have not tried this as a league start. This was my second character this league. I went into it with about 10 divines of currency to get myself started, to bankroll myself through the entire leveling process. I definitely wasted some money and didn't spend efficiently, but I have not tried this as a league starter. I think it is viable so long as you manage to get a Crown of the Pale King between level 16 and level 20. If you do not manage to get that either through buying it for 1 or 2 exalts, it's seriously very cheap, or through just getting lucky and dropping it, I then don't think you can league start. But I think if you manage to get it, would actually make quite a fun league start. Gearing's a little bit difficult, but it is still very, very fun. And some final questions that I bet I'm going to be asked: is this SSF viable? Again, if you can get the Crown of the Pale King, yes. It won't be easy, but just somehow get yourself a Crown of the Pale King. Just, I guess, farm enough enemies until one of them drops it. If you get one of them, go for it. SSF viable. Thumbs up. Next question. Is this hardcore viable? Absolutely the fuck not. Did you not hear me complain relentlessly about enemies that do not hit you and little chaos plants that I mentioned earlier? Is this hardcore SSF viable? Is anything? Am I? Are you? Is HC SSF really for the saint of mine? I know we don't have Xana telling us to stay sane, Exile, in this game, but stay sane, Exile. Do not play HC SSF. What are you doing with your life? And with that said, I think I have said everything that is important to this video. I hope it has not run extremely long. I hope you enjoyed it. Like if you liked the video, subscribe if you would like to see the leveling guide for this build, as well as future Path of Exile content that I may create. This is my first video foraying into the space, but I do thoroughly enjoy Path of Exile, so I will probably cover it in the future. I love Path of Exile 1 as well. I don't know if I understand it well enough to do build guides, but maybe I will at some point, and I will do more build guides in the future for Path of Exile 2 as I learn and understand more about the game. So give a subscribe to see that. Give a comment to tell me what you think of Thorns, to ask me any questions you have about Thorns, and to just give me engagement, because that helps the video get pushed. I would like to make YouTube videos more often, and if they're doing well, that makes that a lot easier. And in general, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay silly.